All right, ladies and gentlemen, so just a quick review on what the expectations are coming up for this next week. So I'm recording this on Friday. All of your makeup work is due today. And then whatever class day you are watching this lecture, today your French Revolution notes are going to be due and your video class is going to be due. You should have your French Revolution notes open to be able to complete this. And then there's going to be a video quiz at the end that reviews the information, okay? Depending on when you're watching this video, your enlightenment stations are due on Monday, okay? So you need to make sure that those are turned in by the evening, spread it out over the weekend if you're hearing this on Friday, or get that done by midnight tonight if you're hearing this on Monday. All right, so up to this point with the enlightenment stations, you guys were learning about this major fundamental change in not just European history, but in world history. This change in thinking that really revolutionized how people saw themselves and how people saw the world. So ideas like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the attainment of property, this idea that you have the capacity to think logically and that we inherently are born with the ability to think for ourselves, caused us to challenge how we looked at our governments. You see, there was this idea that this belief that God had created government and that you obeyed government because it existed and that that's why it existed, because it was supposed to exist. But these ideas change, and what really kind of gets some strength and traction is something called the social contract. So the social contract is this idea that government derives its power from you. Okay? That power doesn't just exist, that it is given and traded. Okay? And so it's the social contract. What it says is that I give a little bit of my state of nature, a little bit of my freedom to the government in exchange for them protecting my freedom and them protecting my safety. That is the job of government. And then when it doesn't protect my rights and protect my safety, then I have the right to end that contract, to overthrow the government and put a government in place that works for me. Okay? This is foundational to American democracy and to global democracy. This idea that the purpose of government is to serve the people and that it exists at the pleasure of the people, and that the people have the ability to get rid of their government if it is not serving them. Now, you guys have experienced the social contract. In fact, you experience it every day. It's something that kind of happens subconsciously, okay? You guys know inherently that you have the ability to run around and be psychos every day in school. Okay, you know you technically have that freedom. There are consequences, but you know you have that freedom. But for some reason, most of us come to school and follow the instructions in exchange for learning. But sometimes you'll notice that breaks down. That when you have a bad teacher or you have a bad sub, those behaviors, those things that are given, go away. You see, again, it exists as a social contract. So you give me a little bit of your freedom and give me authority in exchange for the expectation that I give you a safe learning environment and that I teach you something that is important to your life. Now, if I was not teaching you what you needed, or I wasn't creating a safe learning environment, then you will naturally see that we have a desire to rebel against that you'll start to see misbehaviors, disrespect, and not really seeing the teacher as an authority figure anymore. So social contract is part of your everyday life. And really, the Enlightenment ideas are going to go one of two ways. It's either going to result in monarchy saying, hey, we need to give the people a little bit of what they want if we want to stay in power. So you start seeing representative government bodies in places like England and Germany and even in Russia, these representative officials that are elected to give the people a voice in government. Also things like Bill of Rights or Constitution. A Bill of Rights protects you from your government. Say if your government wants to, torture you to get you to confess to something or to take your property away without notice. A Bill of Rights protects those natural rights that your government is supposed to keep safe. So you're going to see some governments do that. And then the opposite is that people are going to take those ideas and be like, nope, what the government's doing is not enough. We need a new one. And so that's going to happen with the American Revolution. And it's going to be relatively peaceful. It was a war, but the French are also going to have a revolution, but it's going to turn out very differently. The French Revolution is far more influential as far as global politics and understanding of democracy than the American Revolution, but it's not as successful. Okay, so during this class, we are playing a game. Okay, so the Wealth of France Revolutionary Feelings game. If you are watching this video, that means that you either were not in class or you're catching up. So if you were in class, follow along with your with the estate that you were assigned in class. If you don't know, pick an estate. Okay, so pick an estate, first, second, or third, and I will tell you on the PowerPoint how many oops passes you have. So you're going to use this activity to help understand why the French Revolution occurred. One of the major causes of the revolution is the distribution of wealth. There is massive wealth inequality in France. And so people are not able to feed their kids. They're paying really heavy taxes. And so there's going to be this unhappiness at the bottom. And so here's the game. Each of you will be assigned an estate. Again, I already told you what to do. The estate is going to tell you how many oops passes you receive at the beginning. Okay. Also going to tell you what taxes you need to pay. So keep track of how many you have, and you will get to keep however many oops passes you have at the end. Okay. So you have the tracker over on just below. So it's going to ask you what estate are you, how many oops passes did you start with, and then what is the end result. Make sure you come back and finish that to make sure you don't have any missed points. Okay. So here's a simulation. So you are officially in France under Louis XIV. So remember, we talked about him, the Sun King. Okay. Under Louis XIV, France became a successful, powerful monarchy, the most in the world. It also ends up being one of the wealthiest nations in all of Europe. And Louis XIV had been able to successfully consolidate power from the nobles and get them to do it willingly by trading with them for some things. So one of the things that he did, the question is, what privileges did King Louis give that allowed this to happen, allowed the nobles to give up their power? One was he said, hey, you don't have to pay taxes. I got you. And if you owe anybody money, I got you too. And then on top of that, I'm going to pay you to be a part of the government. And then on top of that, I'm going to pay for your entire lifestyle to live it up at Versailles. Party all night, every day, the best of the best. And so the nobles were so consumed with this lifestyle, Louis XVI had the power to take over the country completely. Okay, so here are our estates. So the French system is divided into three estates. Okay, these are the three social classes. First is the clergy. Okay, so the clergy, if that's the group that you were assigned, you're going to start with 6 oops passes. So check 6 of those boxes on your tracker. So this is the church leaders. If you're in the second estate, those are the nobles. Okay, the nobles are going to be given 5 oops passes to start. So these are the people who are born into the aristocracy. They're living at Versailles, lots and lots of money, living it up. And then the last estate is everybody else. The first and second estate only make up 3% of the population. 97% is the third estate. Okay? And the third estate is broken up into 3 groups. Okay, so if you were assigned the third estate and you are the bourgeoisie, you will see yours here in a second. The bourgeoisie were merchants, bankers, lawyers, doctors, journalists, professors, basically professionals, people who had made their own money. Okay, so they weren't nobles that were born into it. They had worked. Okay, the urban workers and then the rural peasants. Urban workers are going to work for the bourgeoisie. The rural peasants are going to be working out in the fields, usually for the nobility. Okay, so they're kind of a slave. If you were a bourgeoisie in the third estate, you're going to start with 4 oops passes. If you're an urban worker, you're going to start with 3 because you make your own money. And if you're a rural peasant, you're going to have 2. Okay, so mark that on your paper. Pause the video if you need to. Mark that on your paper so you can keep track of it. Okay, so the first estate doesn't pay taxes. The second estate doesn't pay taxes. The third estate pays all the taxes. Okay? And the top 2 that pay the most taxes are going to be the urban workers and the bourgeoisie, because they're the ones who are making a wage. Because rural peasants, they're technically taken care of sort of by the nobles. They don't have the same income to tax, so they get taxed a little bit less. And so this system, I've already kind of mentioned this, is called the Ancien Regime, okay, or the Old Order of the Middle Ages in France. So this is a system that had started way back, and it was all about privileges related to taxes. Most of the taxes are going to be paid by those self-made people. So the merchants, the bankers, the lawyers, the doctors, the journalists, the professors. And they're not going to be super excited about paying a majority of those taxes. So again, the estate system, for the definition, the system is also known as the Ancien Regime or the Old Regime. It's a 3-class system that determined privileges, that's your notes blank, and tax-paying status. So clergy, second the nobles, last the bourgeoisie and the peasants. Okay, so Louis XVI's great-grandson, Louis XIV, is not going to be as commanding a presence as Louis XVI had been. Remember, we talked about that the government had really been built around Louis XVI, and that probably, historically, that hadn't worked out when it got passed down generation to generation. So, though well-intentioned, King Louis XVI was weak and indecisive, and I have fondly referred to him over the years as a goob or a goober. Okay? He's nice, but he's squishy in like the leadership sense. Like he just kind of does whatever people want him to do. He's a little bit scared. He's a little bit frail. And he just kind of gets pushed around by the nobility. But because he is the king of the most powerful, wealthiest nation in the world, he is going to get the top prize princess that he marries. So he is going to marry the Austrian princess from the Habsburg house, named Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette was thought to be the most beautiful princess of the time, one of the most beautiful women in the world, arguably, intelligent, well-educated, came from a much more, a society where women were more involved and more revered. They had really strong female queens in the area that she was from. And so she had a very different expectation coming into France than what was the reality for her. And she is going to end up being the target of a lot of people's anger because she's bored. She doesn't do anything, so she spends a lot of money. So they call her Madame Deficit. Deficit means you owe people money. You're in debt. Okay, so it is tax day. So the third estate must pay one oupspass each to the second estate. So how is this going to work? Is you are going to, if you're in the third estate, no matter what group you're in, you need to cross out one oupspass or erase it on your tracker. Okay. If you are in the second estate and you've been paid taxes, you need to add 5 checks to your oupspass tracker. Okay. So again, third estate, you take one oupspass off. Second estate, you're going to add 5. Because again, you're a smaller population, but you're being paid by the whole population, so you get a lot of money. Or oupspasses in this case. Okay, so in 1789, this is going to be the turning point year. Okay, this is going to be the year that the revolution starts. 2 major issues are going to spark these revolutionary feelings. One is the Enlightenment. Remember, it starts in France. And those Enlightenment ideas are going to cause the American Revolution. And France helps pay for the American Revolution. So people are going to be like, well, what about us? Like, they fought for freedom and for individual rights, and you helped pay for it. So what about us? And then lastly is a financial crisis in France that's going to create just a terrible money situation for the country, and people end up starving. Okay, so in 1789, again, those Enlightenment ideas, France was the home of the Enlightenment. There was no way that they were going to be able to avoid it. But what's important to understand is that absolutism actually created the ability to have the Enlightenment. Now, I say that because King Louis XIV made France so wealthy that France could actually afford to pay people to sit around and talk about ideas. But France is going to be the original home, Paris. So people like Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu, all of them are French. And those ideals are going to trickle down in the population, particularly with the bourgeoisie. So Enlightenment ideas are going to spread through written pamphlets and through spoken word. People are going to get up in salons, they're going to get up in the street, and they're going to talk about these things in public, and they're going to print pamphlets to pass out to people. Again, the printing press strikes again. And members of the unprivileged third estate, so the bourgeoisie, the urban poor, the peasants in the countryside, but particularly the bourgeoisie, are going to be very, very inspired by these Enlightenment ideas, because the bourgeoisie was proof that each individual had the ability to determine their destiny because they had created their own wealth and their own lives. And so the third estate was inspired by the American Revolution, and those Enlightenment ideas are going to demand equality, that just because you were born in the nobility does not make you better than me. Liberty, that I should be able to determine how my life turns out. And democracy, I should have some influence in the people who are governing me, that I should have some say in how the government runs. And so looking at this cartoon, we see a peasant here, a noble here, and a church leader here, riding on the backs of the peasant. Okay, so also that financial crisis. So they have a huge debt problem. So remember, King Louis XIV died, leaving France in a bunch of debt because he felt the need to continue to fight wars over and over and over again to prove to the other nations how powerful he was. And this is very, very common with powerful nations. They end up kind of in this cycle where they feel like they need to be perpetually fighting wars to show that they are still strong. That's going to be true with France. It's going to be true with Germany, all the way through World War I and World War II. It's going to be true with the United States even today, that we find ourselves kind of in this perpetual state of war because of the strength and reputation that we've developed. Also, you have these lavish courts that you're paying for. 6% of all the money coming into the country are paying for this ridiculous lifestyle. And food prices are going to soar. Now, taxes are not super exciting to talk about, but we talked about when we looked at King Louis XIV that they created all these tariffs. Sorry, I keep hitting my microphone. Created these tariffs to make sure that people bought goods in France. And at the time, it worked. But now, France has a bad harvest, okay? All of the wheat is gone. And so there's nothing to buy in France. So now the only option they have left is to buy the more expensive stuff that's being brought in. And so those prices go way up. People cannot afford to feed themselves. Okay, so this is the budget in 1789. How money is being spent in France. 6% is going to life at Versailles. That doesn't look like a lot, but of an entire country's income, that's a lot. Then you have 20% going to the military, which sounds about right. You have 25% going to public works. That should be much closer to 65, 75%. And then the rest of the budget goes to paying off debts that they owe to other countries, money that they borrowed to pay for their wars and for their courts. So there are really only three solutions in any government to fix this. 1, raise taxes. 2, to decrease spending. Or 3, do both. We'll see what King Louis' solution is. So Louis XIV is going to be really bad at finances. He's really going to be just not very good at being king. He gets better over time, but by the time he figures it out, his death sentence has been signed. But he's going to make a smart decision about his financial advisor. There had been calls from the bourgeoisie to bring in somebody who was an Enlightenment thinker. So he hired Jacques Necker. Jacques Necker was very well respected and was a member of the bourgeoisie, was very well known for his Enlightenment economic ideas, and he came up with some really practical solutions. 1, being stop extravagant court spending. Like, why are we spending 6% of our entire income on supporting the lifestyle of the nobles? Two, reform the government. We need to give people, just like some of those other nations have, we need to give people some representation, some voice in government, appease them. Most people in this time weren't looking to overthrow their governments. Like, that's a big thing. Most people just wanted their government to be fixed. They wanted some representation. They wanted some power. A lot of them respected their king. So it wasn't like, oh, yes, get rid of the king. That's not really how it starts. And then abolish tariffs on international trade. So remember, we were talking about the trade stuff and why the bread was so expensive. Get rid of those taxes so we can bring food in from other countries and start feeding people. Because people who are starving don't usually like their governments all that much. Okay, and then the next part, and get a little closer because that plane flying over. He wants to start making the first and second estate pay taxes, which again sounds reasonable. You have a majority of the wealth, but you're paying zero taxes. And we've got a money problem, and you've got a lot of money. You're not paying your fair share, you need to pay. But understandably so, the nobles are not a huge fan of this guy. Because why? I don't want to pay taxes. Nobody wants to pay taxes. But like, I'm good. Like, I know like that guy's starving over there, but like my version of France is awesome. I don't really think that's necessary, says the noble or the clergy. And I wish I could say that King Louis was like, no, this man is going to help us fix France. And who knows what France would have looked like if he had made a different decision. But because he's a weenie, he gets pressured by the nobles into firing him, which really upsets the bourgeoisie Enlightenment thinkers in France who have a lot of influence. Oh, and P.S., after all that, now, third estate, you owe your tithes, which are your church taxes. So go to your OOPS tracker, and you are going to cross out 2 OOPS passes, because you're going to pay the first estate, pay your taxes. First estate, you got paid. It's payday. You are going to add 10 tally marks to your OOPS tracker. Some of you have ended up in a situation, okay? You're out of OOPS passes and you can't pay your taxes. So now you're going to go to jail so that you can work to pay off your debts. You went to debtor's prison. Now your kids are starving. Some of you are totally out of OOPS passes and some of you don't have much. Some of you are doing great. Okay, so looking at how many OOPS passes we ended up with, if you are a rural peasant, you have -1 OOPS passes. Okay, you're in debt just to pay your taxes. You are starving, your kids are starving, you have no property, you have no way of moving up in the world, you're stuck. Okay, and starving mamas almost always are at the center of a revolution. Mamas who can't feed their kids. Okay, then urban poor. You have one, or you have none. At least you're not in debt, but you can't feed yourself. And the bourgeoisie, you are the backbone of the economy. You have worked so hard to make your money. But out of the 4 OOPS passes you started with, you have 1. 1! All of your hard work and 75% of your income is gone. Now, if you're a noble, you're doing great. You've got 10 OOPS passes, so now you can buy that gold cup or toilet that you didn't need. And lastly, the first estate. Y'all are doing really well. Clergy, wow, you have 16 OOPS passes. Your homeless carpenter god must be very impressed by your fancy gold-threaded robe. 16 for 1% of the population, 10 for 2% of the population, and a total of 1 for the rest of everybody else. Understandably so, this is not acceptable. And the people are going to make sure the government knows it. Okay, so just to put it in perspective, okay, to really understand the discrepancy in population, okay, the blue is how many people were in the first estate. The red is how many people were in the second estate. The yellow is everybody else. So that's population, okay? When you look at wealth, this is what it looks like. The first estate, even though they're only 1% of the population, has nearly 60% of the wealth. The second estate has 37% of the wealth. And the third estate, because of taxation, holds less than 4% of the entire nation's wealth. But this is where all of the taxes are coming from. But the game is not over until the lady sings. Where'd it go? The game's not over till the lady sings, so hang tight. We'll see how many oops passes you end up with. Okay, so because nobles have gained back their power over time, he can't tax them by decree. So that power that King Louis XIV had to say, hey, now I'm going to tax the nobles, when he had all that power, now that's gone. Between Louis's father and himself, the nobles have gotten something called the Assemblies of Notables, which basically the king can't do anything unless the nobles say, yeah, you can do that. So the king has to beg, please, 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 please let me tax you. No. Why would I pay taxes? Like, I'm good. I don't need to pay taxes. So the nobles are going to encourage him to call the Estates General to try to appease the Enlightenment kind of rabble that's pushing. Okay, so the nobles and clergy want the king to call the Estates General. We talked about the Estates General a long time ago, very briefly, only to say that King Louis XIV never called it. It's this representative body of people who come from all three estates that advise the king. Okay, but it's weird that the nobles and clergy want that so badly. So it's a lawmaking body that worked as an advisory to the king, consisting of representatives from all three estates. Okay, but it's outdated. This was made back in the medieval period. Now we've got the bourgeoisie, we've got a middle class. Now we've got people who are educated, who are making money. Before, this lower group, the third estate, was just poor people. So they were really easy to control. But these people are educated, they're professionals, and they contribute to commerce. They carry the tax burden, but they don't have any rights or privileges in government. And so, again, it's fishy that nobles really want this so bad. Why would they want to have the third estate come together? So the first issue with the Estates General is voting. Okay, so again, this is an old system, and it's really not designed for equality. Okay, so tradition held that each estate gets one vote. Now we're pretty good at fractions, at least small ones like this. 2 out of 3 is the majority. So if the first and second estate do not want to get taxed, they can always outvote the third estate. If they team up, third estate's out of luck. And since they all have the wealth and the power and the influence, there's really no point for the third estate to even be there. So the third estate wants all the estates to meet together and take votes counted by head. Thinking about why that would benefit the third estate, they obviously have more people. And so if you vote by head, they represent 97% of the people in the country. So that's not going to work for the first and second estate. So they end up in a stalemate. Okay. Stalemate means nothing happens. They're stuck in the same spot. There's not moving. It's like when something gets stale, like water gets stale, you leave it in the cup for 3 days, you taste it, it tastes funny, it's stale. So it's stalemate, it's not moving. And so the third estate is like, forget this. We're going to have our own assembly. We're going to call ourselves the National Assembly. And what we're going to do is we're going to be representatives from the third estate. And what our goal is to create a constitution for France, to protect our rights, to bring greater equality to the nation. Now, King Louis is, in response, again, Goob, his solution, you walked out, so I'm going to lock you out because that's going to solve the problem. But that's not going to deter them. They end up moving to the tennis court next door and taking an oath that they're not going to leave until France has a constitution. And this really makes the nobles and the clergy and the king nervous. Okay? Because this was a much bolder move than anybody had been willing to make in the past. This would have been a very easy one and done kind of thing had this happened a few years prior. King Louis, because he's kind of a weenie, but he's also rightfully afraid, is going to accept it as a lawmaking body. Okay, fine, you guys can exist publicly, but he's going to fear for his safety. He really doesn't trust them, and again, rightfully so. And so he is going to leave the capital and he's going to go to Versailles. Okay, but the National Assembly and the people of Paris, I'm sorry, he doesn't leave Versailles. He leaves Versailles to go to Paris to try to help manage things. That is an error. And so when he gets to Paris, the people of Paris are like, oh no, he's here to take out the assembly. And so there starts to be this paranoia and fear that bubbles up. Okay, so all of this fear and paranoia and like revolutionary fervor is going to bubble up until on July 14th, 1789, 800 Parisians, so people from Paris, are going to storm the Bastille. Okay, the Bastille is a medieval fortress that served as a prison, but really it was seen as kind of this like relic of the monarchy. The crowd believed that there were weapons and gunpowder in there. And so their goal is to try to storm it and steal the guns. But the commander refused to open the gates and opened fire on the crowd, killing many people. Okay, so there is this toxic combination that sets in something called mob mentality. Okay, mob mentality or groupthink, and it has a lot to do with fear and paranoia and danger. When you get a group of people together who are really emotional about something, if you're not very conscious about your behavior, choosing to be very independently thinking, there's a psychological phenomenon that happens that your brain actually flips a switch, and you kind of start acting as a mob. You do things that you never thought you would do. You are much more capable of being violent or causing destruction than you would have been if you didn't get into that mindset. And so when the commander fires into the crowd, he amps up this fear and people are dying and afraid. And so the mob becomes so rabid that they actually are going to break through the Bastille. This is a fortress. They're going to break through the Bastille. They're going to kill the commander. They're going to kill the guards, and they're going to release some of the prisoners. Okay. They weren't trying to release the prisoners. They were trying to get guns, and they really shouldn't have released the prisoners. There were only like 7 there, and they were all terrible. But they found no weapons. But the Bastille, again, becomes this symbol. July 14th, 1789 is it's Bastille Day. Or the Bastille. It's what they see as their 4th of July. Okay, so it became a symbol. And this is marked officially at the beginning of the French Revolution. Okay, that we've stormed the Bastille, the mob has taken over, we are going to create a new government. Okay, all right, so let's check out what happens here at the end of our game. So at the onset of the French Revolution, it's going to lead to radical equality. Okay, this idea that we are going to get rid of the estates completely. We are all the same. Fraternity, brotherhood. No matter what family you were born to, you are equally valuable. Of course, if you were the first or second estate, you're probably dead. But we'll talk about that later. So in the spirit of the French Revolution, all of the oops passes will be confiscated and redistributed. So each of you through this game have earned 1 oops pass. All of you are radically equal. Okay, so I'll record this for your future use, so you have an additional oops pass for the semester. Okay, here's the last thing that I need you to do for today. So our review quiz that we're going to do is off of Edpuzzle. Edpuzzle is basically a website that allows me to ask questions built into a video. And we are going to be using Edpuzzle for the documentary we're going to watch next week. So I want to introduce it. So your notes are due today. This video is due today. So what you're going to do to find this, you're going to go to Google Classroom and you're going to click on Edpuzzle, What Caused the French Revolution. Okay, you're going to click on this link and it's going to take you to this video. You'll notice that the video, there's these little teardrops on the bottom. Each of those represent a question that you're going to need to answer. It's going to automatically pop up. You don't need to do anything. It's set so that you cannot fast forward the video. You just need to watch it and answer the questions. However, you can rewind. So if you miss something, you can back up and rewind it. Once you're done with the quiz, it's automatically going to submit me your score, but it's not going to mark it as done. Okay, so you need to go back to Google Classroom so it doesn't show up on your to-do list, and you need to mark it as done when it's complete. Okay? If you have any questions, please let me know. So again, that's what this says, mark it as done. If you would like to, there's an additional learning video here at the end of the PowerPoint that I've posted on Google Classroom as well with the PowerPoint. Again, if you guys have any questions, let me know, but have a fabulous rest of your day.